We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 36b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the Machlokas Tanoim in the Mishnah. Let's say the claimant, he says to the witnesses that if you testify for me, then you won't be struck, or if you testify for me, then you will be blessed. And so the question over there is, if the witnesses deny that they know testimony and they take a false shvuah to that effect, are they going to be liable in terms of shvuas ha'edus? And the way the Mishnah had it was that Rabbi Meir was the one who said chayiv. He said they are liable, and the Chachamim said pater. And the idea is that Rabbi Meir seems to be holding mechlal lav atashomei ahein. If you say that if you testify you will be blessed, so that implies the reverse, that if you don't testify then you're going to be cursed, and that's the case of shvuas ha'edus. So there is liability. But again, that would imply that Rabbi Meir holds mechlal lav atashomei ahein. And so the Gemara had asked that we find in other places that Rabbi Meir holds that we don't say the rule of mechlal lav atashomei ahein. And the Gemara now continues and says ella epoch. Rather, we are going to have to reverse the opinions in our Mishnah. We will have to say that it's actually Rabbi Meir who says exempt in this situation, because he does not hold of the rule of mechlal lav atashomei ahein, and it's the Chachamim who say liable in this case. Again, ella epoch, you have to reverse the opinions in our Mishnah. Afilu be'isura lesle, because Rabbi Meir, even by situations of Isser, not only by situations of mumminess, not only by money, but even by Isser, Rabbi Meir does not hold of the idea of mechlal lav atashomei ahein. The Gemara in the previous summit had tried to make a distinction between mumminess and Isura, and now the Gemara is saying there is no such distinction, and that comes from what the Gemara asked on the previous summit from the case of Sota. But the Gemara continues and asks, Maskiflo Ravina asks on this, Uvi Isura Lesle, but is it really true that by Isser, Rabbi Meir does not hold of the idea of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein? Elamayata, but according to that, Shesuya Yayin Upruei Rosh, what about Kohanim? Let's say they're intoxicated and they serve in the Beis HaMikdash, or let's say they're Pruei Rosh, which means that they have overgrown hair and they serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Divamisa, there the punishment is death. So Hachanami the Lesle Rabbi Meir, are you going to say over there also that Rabbi Meir does not hold of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein? And what the Gemara means to say is that the entire source of Misa is based on Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein. V'hatanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, the Mesoras Hashas changes it to V'hatanya. We learned in a Brisa, Elu Shebemisa, the following cases, the punishment is death. Shesuya Yain Upruei Rosh, again, a case where they're intoxicated, or a case where they have overgrown hair. And what the Gemara really means to ask over here is that everybody really should hold of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein over here. This is something that is not under dispute, and therefore by Yisur it seems that everybody holds of this principle. And Rashi explains v'hatanan, but we learned in the Mishnah elu shebamisa v'lo polig isholah. The point is that nobody argues with this, and we'll see the Rashi's previous in terms of how this is connected to mechlal lav atashomei ahein. Shesuya yayin divamisa lo shaminan la elohein mechlal lav. The only reason we know that if the Kohanim are intoxicated that there's a punishment of a death penalty is because of hein mechlal lav. Techsev yayin v'shecher al teishta v'lo tamusu, because the way the pasuk phrases it is, don't drink, don't become intoxicated, and then you won't die. Ha'im tishtu, and so therefore that implies that if you do drink before Achem el Ol Moed Tamusa, then when you come to the Ol Moed, then you will die. So it's all an idea of Hein Mechlal Lav and Pruei Rosh Nafkolan Midi Iskish L'Shasuya Yayin B'Sefer Yecheskel. Pruei Rosh is also learned out just from a comparison to the case of intoxication. That's in Sefer Yecheskel. So again, it's all based on the idea of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein. So it must be that everybody agrees by Isura that we say Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein. And so the Gemara continues and answers Elo Liolam Sepach. Rather, you should really reverse the opinions in the Mishnah. And again, it's Rabbi Meir who holds exempt because he does not hold of the rule of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein. And Ki Lesle, when does he not hold of the rule? B'mamona, that's by cases of mumminess. B'isura Isle, but by cases of prohibition, he does hold of the rule. That's by Shasuya Yayin and Pruei Rosh. V'shani Sota, and it's different by Sota. Di Isura Di Ispe Mamonahu, because that's a case of Isser, but it has a mammon component, a monetary component as well, because of the Ksuba. And the Gemara is applying that to Shavuos Eidus as well. It has a monetary component, and so therefore, when it comes to the cases that have a monetary component, there Rabbi Meir does not hold of the idea of Mechlal Lav Atashomei Ahein. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan Ela Liolam Epoch, really, again, we should reverse the opinions in the Mishnah. V'chi Lesle B'mamona, he doesn't hold of it by money. Kolomar, Ela Ki Mifchas Lo, when you reverse it, Lo Teima Afilu B'Isura Lesle, don't say that by Isra he doesn't hold of it. Ela Vada Isla, he certainly does hold of it by Isser. That's why there is no argument at all by Shesuya Yayin, because everybody agrees to Mechlal Lav at Hashomei Ahin over there. V'shani Sota the Isura the Isbei Memona, who Sota is different because it involves money. Gevias Ksubasa, again, it involves the collection of her Ksuba. Ushvuot the Masnisa Nami Ali de Mamun, but also when it comes to Shavuot Eidos, that all happens through a monetary claim. Hilkach Rabbi Meir Poter, therefore Rabbi Meir would say Poter Kedav Chinon, as we have reversed the opinions. And Rashi notes, Uvalav Epoch Lekal L'Terutza. Now, if we don't reverse the opinions of the Mishnah, we will not be able to give this answer. Dimkain Rabbi Meir Shvuot de Masnisin Isura Gredasi, because if we say that we're not going to reverse the opinions, then you're going to have to say, according to Rabbi Meir, that who's now saying liable in this situation, that he's considering the Shvuah of the Mishnah to just be Isser, and that's why he would be applying the rule of Mechlal Lav at Hashomei Ahin, because you'd have to say that that's what the situation is. And therefore, if the Rabbanan are then going to argue on Rabbi Meir and say Potter by a situation of Isser alone, so then it would come out that they don't hold of Mechlal Lav at Hashomei Ahin, afilu bisur graded, even in a case of only Isser, and imkain Shesuya Yayin to Misa Rabbanan Minolu. And if so, we're back to the question by Shesuya Yayin, how did the Rabbanan know that there's Misa? Because again, that's something that everybody has to agree to. V'chein matzasi lashon bavli b'svar mishanim lo itmar lo seipach misham kushya the Shesuya Yayin l'Rabbanan. Rashi says, I found that as well, that the idea is you can't say lo seipach, because then you're going to end up with a question by Shesuya Yayin according to the Rabbanan. In other words, what Rashi is saying is everybody's going to have to agree by Shesuya Yayin and Pruei Rosh, and therefore everyone's going to have to agree by Isura Gredita that we do apply the rule of Mechlal Lav at Hashomei Ahin. And so therefore in our Mishnah you're going to have to say that it has to have some kind of mammon, it has to have some kind of monetary component. And so again, Rabbi Meir is the one who says in those situations where there's a monetary component, we do not apply the rule of Mechlal Lav at Hashomei Ahin. Hadron Aloch Shevuos Ha'edus, we'll return to you Perek Shevuos Ha'edus. This is the end of the fourth Perek of Mesechet Shevuos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe, and take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the fifth Perek of Mesechet Shevuos with the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, Shavuos HaPikadon, in the case of Shavuos HaPikadon, that refers to a situation where a person takes a false oath with regards to a deposit, and so then he has to pay back, and he has to add a fifth, and also bring a carbon asham. And so the Mishnah says, Noheges ba'anashim uvenashim, that applies by men and women, Barachokim uvekrovim, it applies by non-relatives and relatives, Biksheirim uvepsulim, it applies by those who are able to testify and those who are not able to testify, Bifnei bezin v'shalo bifnei bezin mipiatzmo, it applies whether in front of the court or not in front of the court, if he took the oath on his own, but if the oath was administered by others, he's only liable if he denies it in court. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Chachamim say, it doesn't matter if he took the oath on his own or it was administered by others. But once he denies it, chayiv, he is liable, meaning to say it doesn't have to be specifically in Bezdin, according to the Chachamim. The chayiv al zadon hashvua v'al shegagasa im zadon HaPikadon, the person is liable. Let's say there's a Zadon HaShvuah, that means to say it's on purpose in terms of the oath, in terms of taking the false oath, or even if you have a situation where he was shogeg with regards to the punishment for taking the false oath, he wasn't aware that the punishment was to bring that carbon, but there is Zadon HaPikadon. In other words, he knew that he was falsely denying that he owed the Pikadon. V'eino chayiv al shegegasa gredasa, he's not chayiv on shogeg. If it's a complete shogeg, he's not liable to bring that carbon. Uma chayiv al zadona, and that, what is he liable to when he does this on purpose? Asham bekesef shkalim, he's chayiv to bring a carbon asham, and it has to be worth 2 silver shekel. And Rashi explains, Shavuos HaPikadon ba'anashim uvenashim, it's by men and women. I did the Tana b'Shavuos Ha'edus ba'anashim v'lo b'nashim, since earlier by Shavuos Ha'edus it said with men and not with women, so Tananu Nami Lakulu. So here we list all of these, and we say again that it does apply with all of these individuals. B'krovim, by relatives, Shabal HaPikadon Karav Lazeh HaPikadon Etzlo. That would mean, let's say the owner of the Pikadon is related to the person who's holding the Pikadon, who's holding the deposit. B'fnei Bezdin v'shalo b'fnei Bezdin, if it's, let's say, taken on his own, he takes the oath on his own, so then it applies in front of the court or not in front of the court. Im mipiv nishba shahotzi shvua mipiv, meaning to say, if he actually said if he said the shvua, he said the oath with his own mouth, o sha'ona amen achar shvua, or the same would be, let's say he answered amen after the shvua, v'achar kachod, and then he admits chayiv carbon, he's chayiv to bring a carbon, techsiv v'kichesh ba'amiso koldu, it says v'kichesh, that he denies it, any amount, umipi acheirim. Now if the oath is administered by others, what does that mean? Rashi says, shalo ana amen, amen. That would mean, let's say, he doesn't answer amen. For example, the person says, I'm giving you an oath that you should return my pikadon, v'yamar, and he says, ein lach biyadi, he says, I don't have the pikadon. Eino chayiv at sheyichbor bebezin. So in that case, he's only chayiv if he actually denies it in bezdin. Again, this is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Mishum demushva mipi acherim bepikadon lo ksiv. And the reason for this is because by pikadon, it's never written in the pasuk that the oath was administered by others. So where do we even know this case from? We learn it from Shevuos Ha'edus. Usvir leil Rabbi Meir don't mina umina. Now Rabbi Meir holds, we said this earlier, that if we're learning from Shevuos Ha'edus, you have to learn all the rules from Shevuos Ha'edus, and so therefore, just like by Shevuos Ha'edus, we say that there is a distinction between Bifnei Bezin and Shalo Bifnei Bezin, so we're going to make that distinction over here as well. V'hasim bebezin, over there it's specifically in Bezdin, so again, mipi acherim, it's going to apply specifically in Bezdin, Kedefarishna, Beperkin La'el, this is what I explained in the earlier parak. The Chachamim say no. They hold, yes, we do learn from Shevuos Ha'edus, but then we apply it in our context over here, and in our context over here, there is no distinction made between Bifnei Bezin and V'shalo Bifnei Bezin, and so therefore, if you can learn from Shevuos Ha'edus the idea of Mushba Mipi Acherim now applies. It doesn't matter if it's in front of the court or not in front of the court. And Rashi continues, V'chayiv al Zadon Shevuah delok siv behu v'nelam. It doesn't say v'nelam, no lapse of awareness is written over here, and so therefore we're talking Zadon. Now what's Zadon HaShevuah? Zadon HaShevuah shezachar ala pikadon. Zadon HaShevuah means, number one, he does remember, he knows about the deposit. V'yodei Hashem eschayiv al kvira so carbon. He also knows the halacha, that he's liable if he denies it to bring a carbon. And then you can also have al shegegasa im Zadon HaPikadon. You can also have a shogeg with regards to the carbon, but Zadon with regards to the pikadon. Sheshagag bekarbon, he made a mistake by the carbon, v'hezid bepikadon, but he was doing it on purpose in terms of the pikadon. The yodeya dehezid bepikadon v'kafar, he knows that he's falsely denying the pikadon. Aval inu yodeim chayv of carbon, but he doesn't know if there's a liability to a carbon. Ve'enu chayv al shegegasa greda. So let's say it's a total shogeg, then he's not liable. Im savor lishava be'emes, meaning if he thought he was taking the oath in truth, mishum da'anasu, that's like a case of onus, and therefore he's not liable. Bekesef shkolim, and again the carbon has to be worth at least 2 silver shekel. Hakane b'shnei slime, it has to be purchased for shnei slime, again for 2 shekel. Tehachik siv gabe el ha'asham be'erkacha kesef shkolim. This is what the pasuk says by the el ha'asham. And the Mishnah continues, Shevuos HaPikadon Ketzad, what exactly is the case of Shevuos HaPikadon? Amar lo, he says to him, Tainli pikdoni sheyesh li biyadcha, give me my pikadon which you're holding. Shevuos she'ein lach biyadi, and then the person takes an oath, I don't have what is yours. O she'amar lo ein lach biyadi, or he just says to him, I don't have what is yours. And the other person says, Mashbiachani, I'm going to give you an oath. V'yamar amen, and the person says amen. So harei zachayev. So again, if it's a false oath, he is going to be liable. Hishbia olav chamesh pamim, let's say he gives him the oath 5 times. Bein b'fnei bezin this is whether it's in front of the court or not in front of the court. V'kafar, and he denies it. Chayev al kol achas v'achas. So then he's going to be chayev on every single one. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Matam, what's the reason for this? Why is he chayev on every one? Mimnei sheyachol lachzor lahodos, because he would have been able to retract and admit after each one. Hayu chamisha tov mo. So let's say there are 5 people making a claim from him. Amru lo, they say to him, Tein lanu pikadon sheyesh lanu biyadcha, give us the pikadon which you have in your possession, which is ours. Shvuah she'ein lochem biyadi. Let's say he takes a shua, I don't have anything of yours, and he says that in plural, he says that regarding all of them, eino chayv el achas, then he's only liable to one. However, shvua she'ein lecha biyadi v'lo lecha, if he says it individually, a shvua that I don't have what is yours, and I don't have what is yours, I don't have what is yours, chayv al kol achas v'achas, then he's chayiv on every single one. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Eliezer says, Ad sheyomar shvua ba'achrona. He has to say shvua at the end, he has to say an oath at the end. Rabbi Shimon says, Ad sheyomar shvua l'chol echad v'echad. He actually has to say shvua for each and every individual. And Rashi explains, again, Rabbi Shimon said, why is he chayiv for each oath? Let's say he took 5 oaths, because he could retract and admit, meaning achar kfira, after the denial, nimsa shebechol shvua, hu ko for a moment. It comes out that by every single shvua he took, that's a new denial of money, that's why he's liable for every single one. Shvua ba'achrona, and then we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, he has to say shvua at the end, meaning ein lecha biyadi lo lecha v'lo lecha. He says, I don't have yours, I don't have yours, I don't have yours, b'shvua, and then he says b'shvua, taking an oath at the end, the hashta kaima shvua akulu, because then the shvua is going on all of them. And the Mishnah continues, Tainli pikadon u'sesumas yod gezel va'aveda sheyesh li biyodcha. Let's say the claimant says to the person, give me the pikadon, the deposit, and the tesumas yod, the pledge, and the gezel, the thing that you stole, and the aveda, that which was lost. These are all mine and they're in your possession. And shvuah she'ein lach biyodin, he takes a shvuah, I don't have anything of yours. Eino chayv alachas. So in that case, again, he's only liable to one. But shvuah she'ein lach biyodi pikadon u'sesumas yod v'gezel va'aveda, if he identifies each in the shvuah, he says, I don't have the pikadon, I don't have the tesumas yod, I don't have the gezel, I don't have the aveda, so chayiv al kol achas v'achas, then he's chayiv on each one. Tainli chitin u'seorin v'kusman sheyesh li biyodcha. The Mishnah says, let's say he says, give me the wheat and the barley and the spelt, that's mine, that is in your possession. Shvuah she'ein lach biyodi, he takes a shvuah, I don't have it. Eino chayiv alachas, he's only chayiv one. Shvuah she'ein lach biyodi chitin u'seorin v'kusman, if he identifies each, it takes a shvuah, I don't have your wheat or your barley or your spelt, chayiv al kol achas v'achas, he's chayiv on each one. Rabbi Meir says, Afilo amar chito seor v'kusemes chayiv al kol achas v'achas. Even if he says chito seor and kusemes, he's chayiv on each one, and the Gemara is going to explain what Rabbi Meir means. And the Mishnah continues on Nastu Piti says Biti. Let's say he says you raped or you seduced my daughter. V'hu omer lo anasti v'lo Piti. He says I didn't rape, I did not seduce. Mashbiachani, he says I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, and he says amen. So chayiv is going to be liable in such a case. But Rabbi Shimon says exempt in that case. She'enu meshalim knas al piatzmo, because since the payment over here is a fine, in a situation of a fine is not paid if he would admit, and therefore it's not considered to be a real monetary claim, because if he admitted it, he would not have had to pay anything. So therefore, when he denies it, he's not going to be liable according to Rabbi Shimon. Essentially, since it's a knas, there's no liability. Amrulo, so the Chachamim said to Rabbi Shimon, Afa b'sheinu meshalim knas al piatzmo, even though he doesn't pay the fine portion al piatzmo if he admits, but meshalim boshes upegam al piatzmo, there are other payments. Let's say in a situation of rape, you have to pay for boshes, which is humiliation. You have to pay pegam, which is damages, and so those are real monetary claims, and that's why there is liability. And the Mishnah continues, Ganaftes Shori, let's say, he says, you stole my ox. V'huomer lo ganafti, he says, I didn't steal it. Mashbiachani, he says, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, and the person says, amen, chayiv, he's going to be liable. Ganafti, let's say he says, I stole it. Avalo tavachti v'lo macharti, but I didn't slaughter it, or I didn't sell it, and so that portion that you pay is actually a fine. Mashbiachani, he says, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, and he says, amen, so pater, there he's going to be exempt, because again, there's no liability in terms of shvuas hapikadon when it's a knas, when it's a fine. Hemis shorcha es shori, let's say he says, your ox killed my ox. V'hu omer lo hemis, he says that he didn't kill it, that my ox didn't kill your ox. Mashbiachani, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, he says, amen chayiv, so then he's chayiv. Hemis shorcha es avdi, if he says that your ox killed my slave, that's another case of knas, that you pay 30 shekel. V'hu omer lo hemis, he says that the ox didn't kill the slave. Mashbiachani, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, he says, amen pater, he's exempt, because again, that's a case of a fine. Amar lo chavalta, he says, let's say you wounded me. V'yasisa b'chabur, and you made a wound. V'hu omer lo chavalta, he says, I did not wound you. V'lo asisi b'chabur, I didn't make any wound in you. Mashbiachani, he says, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, he says, amen chayiv, he's going to be liable. That's not a case of a fine. Amar lo, if he says, Amar lo avdo, let's say his slave says to him, he palta as shina, you knocked out my tooth. There the avid would go free, and that's actually considered in the category of a penalty like a fine. V'simisa as ini, or you blinded my eye, which also the avid would go free. V'hu omer, he says, lo ipalti v'lo simisi, I didn't knock out your tooth, I didn't blind you. Mashbiachani, I'm giving you an oath. V'yamar amen, he says, amen, so pater, so he's going to be exempt, because again, that's in the category of a knas. And the Mishnah concludes, Zeh haklal, this is the rule, kol ha-meshalim al piatzmo, anytime a person would pay if he admits, meaning it's not a fine, so chayiv, so then there's liability in terms of shvuas hapikadon, v'she'eno meshalim al piatzmo, but if he doesn't pay when he admits, meaning it's a fine, it's a knas, so then pater, so then he's exempt when it comes to shvuas hapikadon. And the Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Huna v'Rav Shmuel berei de Rav bar Barchana, Rav Acha bar Huna and Rav Shmuel, the son of Rav bar Barchana, v'Rav Yitzchak berei de Rav Yehuda, and also Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda, Tenu Shevuos bei Rabba, they learned Shevuos by the yeshiva of Rabba. Paga behu Rav Kahana met them, and Omar, and he said to them, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph.